Qualys has brought together vulnerability management and patch management, letting security teams discover vulnerabilities and apply patches immediately, all within a single, unified app. Sign up for a free trial of Qualys VMDR, vulnerability management, detection, and response today at securityweekly.com/Qualys. Cybercriminals are using social engineering, loaded with urgency and fear, to successfully prey on victims, your employees, or your customers. Protect your Office 365 email from today's most sophisticated attacks with Barracuda Email Threat Scanner. It's a free tool to help protect your business from these hard-to-detect attacks. The Barracuda Email Threat Scanner uses artificial intelligence to hunt and eliminate Office 365 email threats. Find the cybersecurity threats hiding in your Office 365 email right now. Get your free email threat scan at securityweekly.com/Barracuda. Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. Cyber Risk Alliance, in partnership with InfraGard, has launched the Critical Infrastructure Resilience Benchmark Study. Measure your readiness for ransomware by completing the survey and getting your score by visiting securityweekly.com/CIRB. Security Weekly Unlocked will be held in person this December 5th through the 8th at the Hilton Lake Buena Vista. We're excited to announce our first round of speakers, which includes David Kennedy, Alyssa Miller, O'Shea Bowens, Maria Chiavata, Patrick Coble, Chris Eng, Eric Escobar, Kevin Johnson, and Justin Kohler. Visit securityweekly.com/unlocked. Register today and check out the Rockstar lineup. And now, the security news. Where do we want to start, gentlemen?
At the beginning?
Yeah, this wasn't I don't know. It's an interesting week. It was different.
It was like slow coming out of DEF CON, Black Hat
like,
type of stuff.
Lately, I've been trying to, like, when I go through my roughly 15 to 20-ish stories, I kind of assign them to the host or on the show, right? Especially if it falls outside of my area of expertise, or I just didn't get time to read it. I've been trying to be good about, like, sending it to you folks. Like, this week, there wasn't, like, a whole lot to go around.
Yeah.
Like, it was kind of like Accenture was ransomware. Like, okay, we get it. Microsoft released a patch for Print Nightmare or whatever. Is it Print Nightmare? Again. I guess we should start there, because when I saw that headline, I was basically like, the analysis is Microsoft released the patch, someone was waiting, like had all your tools loaded, and got the patch, reverse engineered it, and was like, there's another flaw, right? Which, I mean, we've seen time and time again. That was kind of my assessment of that one. Would you folks agree?
Yeah.
Pretty much, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's par for the course, basically, right? I mean, and we established on previous shows that it's kind of it's antiquated code. You know, printer code's been around for a long time, and it's just like one of those, like, multifaceted kind of vulnerabilities that people are going to take advantage of.
So my understanding on the new patch is they instead of making it an option to make it admin required to install printer drivers, it's now they're forcing the issue. That's the big thing, because that was like if you applied the first patch and didn't set that registry key, it really didn't fix it. And with that, it solves the root problem of being able to arbitrarily install drivers or files in those directories.
I did see that. So recap that for me again. If you're a non-admin user, you can't install a printer driver? Is that
correct?
I got
you. Have to have
under certain conditions.
Permission.
What conditions are you speaking of, Tyler?
So the condition, there's a flag with inside of that is the must be admin to install printer or easy print, I think is what it's called. But that function with inside of the print spooler is what was the vulnerable piece that could allow you to connect to a remote printer, have it install the printer, double click it, and then that installs the driver as system, which is your DLL if you control the print server.
I see, because we talked about that attack vector, that to make it easy to print, Windows historically just installs the driver. Linux does that as well, right? Like, it goes out and discovers printers and just installs the driver.
Yeah, what are we going to call it when, we can do this on Linux? It's not like a nightmare at that point. It's I don't know.
Yeah.
Bad trip to the psych ward.
I mean, you could say like how many people use Linux to print, but it's largely automated, just like it is in Windows. And I'm sure Mac OS has the same thing because they want to make it easy for the users. They're probably automatically installing drivers as well. I mean, I don't think this is a operating system dependent kind of function. It's a historical thing. Printers suck to deal with. Tyler, I think given your background, you could probably really attest to that, right? And we want to make it as easy as possible to just make stuff work, because it's the bane of our existence if you've worked in IT for any amount of time and tried to allow people to print, right? I don't know. I don't even know if it's less and less today. Like, people still need to print.
Yeah, that's why the print spooler's always been there. It always is going to be there. And there's that backwards compatibility. It's one of those things that they can't just take out of an operating system or re-architect. It's been integrated for so long as legacy code. Like, printing is a core function of business. Like, regardless of what you think of printing and digital, right now you talk about law offices, you talk about medical offices. Everything is still ran on paper. Anything that's contract-based is still largely paper-based. And
and interesting too, a lot of the COVID forms you need, those of us that have kids in school and or camps, I found I've had to print. And what's kind of scary is I print from my phone. I got this Canon app on my phone that I'm highly skeptical, but I'm like, it's kind of convenient to just, I'm on my phone, I got the email, and I want to print the attachment because I got to fill out this form so my kid can go to camp, kind of thing. To kind of bring that down to reality where many of us are.
There was one of the Orange County Choppers memes that I saw the other day, and I wish I could find it. I just looked for it and I can't find it. It was along the lines of senior saying, "I can't print," and his son saying, "The print spooler's off." Yeah. and well, turn it back on. Microsoft hasn't patched it in a month. I can't even print the PDF. I can't even print a PDF? God damn it. I'm out of here.
Yeah, because as we talked about, that's still the spooler functionality.
Exactly.
And that's just the spooler side of this, right? Like there's 4 other different kind of nightmares that are happening between Nightmare Hive and the different RPC commands that you can use to leverage any number of the vulnerabilities, plus the new one that was released at Black Hat on the Kaz Exchange servers. Like, there's a ton of vulnerabilities right now that are being publicly exploited or remotely exploited, whether you're inside or outside the environment.
Oh, I want to talk about DCE RPC. Did you guys see my story number 9 from HD Moore? Wrote a blog post.
Ooh.
If you haven't read this, you got to read this from top to bottom.
I saw this and I didn't get it. I'm like, oh yeah, okay.
Right. Like, I mean, most of us know HD personally and knows he's like one of the nicest people in the world, let alone security, right? But also he's writing very, very well. Like, it is. We read a lot of articles for this show. This article is very well written, and I read it from top to bottom. And to summarize, basically, Windows TCP port 135 is DCE RPC, very similar, if not very much the same as a Unix or Linux RPC, remote procedure call system. So HD's goal was to so HD does Rumble. I think one of the most accurate and complete network fingerprinting tools available. And I tell you, in my testing, I use that as the standard to say, like, if Rumble fingerprinted it as this and found it, if something else doesn't live up to that standard, it's not worth my time. And so HD's team, he was talking about the challenge of fingerprinting Windows workstations versus servers, because the workstation, like Windows 10 versus a Windows server, it's really hard to tell the difference. And he had some heuristics that I forget the exact details, but his heuristics weren't as accurate as he wanted them to be. So he looked to DCE RPC and enumerated all of the remote procedure calls on Windows systems in his lab and was like, I want to see if I can determine, based on the RPC and DCE information coming from port 135, if there's differences in what it reports from a Windows 10 device versus a Windows Server device. And he's like, I didn't have a big enough sample set. So he scanned a portion of the internet to get a larger sample set, put it in an Excel spreadsheet, and basically did a bunch of analytics to determine that for some, for certain operating systems, they will respond in a certain way. Basically was able to, go read the post, right? You can see his methodology. I know he basically used his original heuristics coupled with the analytics from DCE RPC to make a better determination whether that was a workstation or a server. But then like bonus, which I think is one of the coolest things, like that's cool in and of itself. But the bonus was he can determine based on RPC information if the host has a Wi-Fi adapter and what type it is. And some AV software also reports through the DCE RPC process, so he could tell which AV software is running. I mean, that's just like amazing research.
All unauthenticated, by the way. Like,
all
this is all unauthenticated. Using the UUIDs and the comparisons. Like this is getting down to even OS versions, like 1809, which is super helpful for exploitation. Yeah,
but also like you don't just get like a few artifacts back from RPC. In any given host, you could get 1,000 different of the was it UUIDs you said, Tyler, right? Was the unique identifiers that are associated with like a registered service within RPC. So you get 1,000 of those just from one computer, basically. So it's like a big...
Yeah, there's a ton of results. You're basically fuzzing the RPC and doing a comparison or hash lookup on the UUID. I mean, that's a ton of work. That's a really novel way to do accurate fingerprinting without authentication.
It's awesome.
1,000 points of light.
And 12,000 systems helped him by just being exposed to the internet raw, so he could just grab them.
And like, good Lord, why is 135 exposed to the internet?
Was it 135
or 139? That's where I was heading.
135 is RPC, yeah.
Yep. Because you said 139 earlier, I thought.
Did I? Sorry, yeah. 135 is the RPC port, yeah.
Yep.
Very similar to, really quick, Synology. Synology NAS devices. Like, why are they exposed to the internet? I mean, it's basically password spraying, right? And Synology having to come out with an advisory to their users on how to secure your device. Like, really, that's just one thing. Like, don't expose it to the internet. Like, NAS devices weren't meant to be exposed to the internet. Yeah. Why are you doing
I'm curious if they're doing...
saying don't do that?
I'm curious if they're exposing that via like UPnP as part of the setup in order to allow cloud sync and some of their other cloud native apps on the phone and the computer.
It's all for usability. It's that trade-off, right? Same thing with printers. It's all in the name of usability. Could be, in that case, Tyler, for sure. Again, why do you have UPnP in it? I mean, home users, that's a different story, right? Because the firewall will automatically just make the firewall rule for you, which is just frightening.
And anytime you update, like UPnP almost always gets turned back on.
Yes. Yes. Oh, we can talk about IoT devices in a couple of different stories.
Yeah.
Tenable researchers. I think this goes back, I think it was last week I was talking about, like, you analyze the firmware, you find the HTTP server, and you analyze that code for vulnerabilities. Tenable did just that for, I want to say this was for one Arcadian. Say that again? Arcadian. It's spelled weird.
It is.
Arcadian firmware. Thank you, Larry.
I'd like to say I was letting you struggle with it for a little bit, but I had no idea how to pronounce it either.
Yeah, your brain put those pieces together faster than mine did. Yeah, right. Arcadian, thank you, firmware. They found a path, an unauthenticated authentication bypass vulnerability.
This is your story number 2.
My story number 2, based on a path traversal. Like, basically, we've seen this in many different embedded and IoT devices where authentication is applied to a set of pages, but authentication does not apply to, they use some kind of regex or, kind of filtering to say that, like, images aren't applied to /images. Authentication's not it does not require authentication. Therefore, the attack they constructed was basically a path traversal that used images. What was the exact string? %2C.
Was it shortened, or is it %2?
Yeah, %2 basically was like a path traversal, so that if you put images in your URL, it would pass the checks, but your path traversal took you back to the actual management pages, so that unauthenticated you can basically manage the device. And that's what Tenable found. CVE 2021 290.
Yeah.
Good. Good, Lee.
The thing I was looking at it is the when you're creating authentication with a hole like that, it's actually harder to implement than to just put the ACL across the entire access.
Agreed, Lee. Like, why wouldn't you just put unless there was some kind of use case for the images to be unauthenticated? I mean, I have developed web apps where I'm like, this should be accessible without authentication, and these should. You want to make sure, I think, you have absolute paths and not relying on some kind of filter or regex, because usually that's where you run into trouble.
Right. And there's 19 manufacturers who have this stuff. And my take on some of them, these are just, the vendor provided, like your Verizon termination point from the ISP. So who knows when it's going to get updated? You can't go in there and touch it.
Right. And this is the classic problem, because as I've seen with these web management kind of frameworks and web servers for embedded systems, is that they just get recycled. Like, there's a software company in China, usually, in the past. Joel's Backdoor was the famous one that I always reference, right? But that was exactly this. There was a Taiwanese company that made the web server and web management interface, and just other people just licensed it. Because, if you're Buffalo or D-Link, I don't want to write that myself. I've got firmware that's pretty similar. Oh, hey, I can go license that from this Chinese firm, and I can just get their code and embed it in my firmware, and I'm off to the races. And that's why you see, like, the giant list of devices that this affects, because folks just reuse the code.
Yep. My question on this, and this would be a great opportunity for me to go buy one of these devices and try it out, that the initial findings and stuff were for the Arcadian routers, but there are a number of different vendors: Asus, British Telecom, Buffalo, Deutsche Telekom, Telus, Vodafone, a bunch of other manufacturers.
Same processor architecture, right?
But and the question is that what is the commonality? And to me, this seems like either web server or web server configuration. And looking at the output from the actual Tenable announcement,
there's a great Medium post in there that goes through in my description like a full decomposition with source code available on this particular.
Because my question is, what's the common component? And my initial thought was, oh crap, this is a problem with BusyBox. And BusyBox is friggin' everywhere for a web server for stuff. And turns out the HTTP response, when you curl one of these things, the server is Arcadian HTTP 1.0.
Yep.
So for the Arcadian devices, did they just change the HTTP headers for their devices? Or is it a similar back-end web server that they have in common? And why didn't they just use BusyBox, which has been time-tested, proved, beaten up a billion ways to some way?
The collection of...
But BusyBox has...
GNU utilities.
Yes. Which has an HTTP web server.
Yeah, which one of the utilities you can put into BusyBox is the...
And has been around for years and has been used and abused on the internet and is largely...
Still going to write an application on the back end that serves up your web management interface.
But your web server and your configuration should prevent direct directory traversal.
Yeah, no, you can prevent that at the web server level.
This is, in my opinion, it's a web server problem. So what's the web server? Well, I got to go read your article now, Paul, on this one, because
in my description I linked to a Medium post,
and that was your store number two.
Yep.
Yeah. In my article, there's a link to the Tenable report, which is on medium.com, and it gets into the details about how it's checking, and it is quite an interesting read.
Your link is your thing is not a link.
Yeah, my thing is not a link.
Okay,
because my code sucks. My code should have turned that into a link. I need to go fix that.
Oh. But the point isn't to throw Paul under the bus. The point is to say that's a really good read when you get to it. And
yes.
It's like, and you can say, well, damn, that they shouldn't have done that. Or like me, I could have done that and made the same mistake.
But it's really just code reuse, right? Like they basically, Buffalo, D-Link just licensed this. I'm assuming licensed. I don't think they'd give it away for free, right? They licensed this web management interface as opposed to writing it on your own.
There's a ton of, like we kind of called this again, there's a ton of vulnerabilities against external work from home routers or consumer-based routers that are being exploited. In fact, the Mirai bot, I believe, is utilizing a good portion of this. Visual Door actually was testing Visual Door yesterday against some Sonic walls, and it's a pretty slick, like these are all very, very similar in how they're doing remote code execution, or parameters are misconfigured, or CGI is not done right. Like there's a ton of things that are very similar, and it seems like it's common mistakes with inside of the CDIC pipeline or secure coding pipeline or whatever thing is being shared or these developers are outsourcing. And it seems very similar across most of these.
Because it's a really slimmed down web management interface. You know, as we talked about with Mythic, I was impressed with the design because it was a very modern architecture, right? But if you got to put that all on, you know, a firmware where your download's going to be 1.8 megabytes, you're not doing all that fancy stuff. Like you're doing old school CGI, you know, kind of stuff, and that's where mistakes are made. What else we got? Oh, if you want to like read something, Larry, that your story number 3, the Cyber-Symposium. I don't like what's it called when you kind of get enamored with something and you just keep reading it, and even though it's a dumpster fire, like you got to keep reading it. Like
I think that's what it's called, exactly like that.
It's just a dumpster.
It's a time suck. I don't know.
Because you want to watch a dumpster fire because it's
dude, there's fire.
It's fascinating.
It's in a dumpster.
It's like watching fire. Like you're just watching wood burn. And you're like, I don't know why this is so engaging.
I wonder what's in there. Is it garbage? Is it a body? Is it trash? Is it?
I bought a solo stove, and like it's just so cool to like watch the fire. And really, all it is like a stainless steel drum with like some holes in it for airflow, right? And there's a bunch of companies that make it, but like when you put wood in there and you light it on fire, it's just you're just enamored with it. Same thing with this Twitter thread. And there's a couple of Twitter threads out there.
Yeah.
That what is the crux of it? The My Pillow guy.
Yep.
Put it together a Cyber-Symposium. So to talk about how Trump really won the election.
Yeah. So
right? Is that the whole crux of it?
The My Pillow guy has been claiming that
he has evidence.
He has evidence in 37 terabytes worth of data with magic cyber PCAPs. Cyber captures and PCAPs and you know all these words that he doesn't understand, to my understanding, and that they have a smoking gun to prove that China stole the election, and that he has the smoking gun to prove in this cyber data that China modified votes and so forth. And he said, you know, I've had my cyber team look at this, and they say absolutely, China, you know, and Trump should be back in the presidency because the election was stolen.
Yeah, but like Rob Graham and others, Rob Graham went.
So he held the Cyber-Symposium where he said, "Yep, I'm going to give you I'm going to give all these professionals the data, and I'm going to show them the stuff, and they're going to be able to see the smoking gun too."
Didn't happen.
Oh, the Cyber-Symposium happened,
but no evidence. What Rob reported and many others was there was still no evidence.
Yep. Number of PCAPs.
No, I get
number of PCAPs disclosed.
Like if you look at how from a political perspective, right? Like the Obama administration versus the Trump administration dealt with China.
Sure.
Very, very, very different. But so like you can get the theory, right? That China would have a vested interest to be like, Trump basically treats China like crap, so we don't want him in office. I get that.
We get all that.
We get all that. But then you got to come down to having like actual evidence to make that claim, and that's just not. It's just not here. Basically, I'll save you the time of reading the threads. I mean, if you like dumpster fires, you should go read it.
And you should. And quite honestly, there were a bunch of folks that came back at Rob and like, what do you mean you weren't provided evidence? Their red team people got PCAPs. And he's like, oh, and we also saw this other evidence where all the security was defeated on stage. And like, no, it was a batch file that basically said, oh yeah, hey, disable the security so that we can run the Dominion voting system stuff. Without it triggering something or other, and then turn it back on after it's done. Oh, and encrypt the databases. Like, that post got deleted.
Yeah.
So, there, a lot of conspiracy theory, and the biggest takeaway was that I've got the data. I'm going to let you take a look at it, and we're going to show you proof. And zero proof was provided.
I don't know if Neil deGrasse Tyson actually said this, or if it's just pictures kind of in the the quote and the meme, but like, you can believe whatever you want to believe, but like science is still science, and I think that applies here, right? Like if there was actual evidence, like okay, I would take that as actual evidence, but if there isn't,
CISA would like to know.
Yeah, like exactly. But that's what I come back to too. Like CISA was actually created by Trump, which is kind of interesting, but also we've talked about it on the show, right? Like there's. You got to have evidence.
Yep. If he had evidence, why didn't he turn it over to the federal authorities?
Yeah.
Who can do the analysis impartially?
Yep.
The best one that I saw was just recently. There was an article that said the head of his own cybersecurity team that allegedly said, "Oh yeah, this is here." Actually went and did a bunch of interviews with a bunch of folks and said, "Yeah, no, this stuff is a turd. Like there's nothing here."
Right.
His own cybersecurity people.
How does MyPillow have a cybersecurity team and some of these big companies don't?
Oh, it's just
politics.
It's not that they have a cybersecurity team. Is that MyPillow guy went and hired these people to prove that he was right?
Yeah, and that
they don't have a cyber. He hired people to analyze this data. Like it was a cybersecurity team to prove his own ends.
Interesting.
Yeah. And Adrian shared this in Slack. He finally says that Rob Graham said, "All I'm saying is that when there's a PCAP fight, don't bring a pillow."
Yeah, bring PCAPs.
Yeah,
don't even bring a MyPillow. Apparently, for the record, this is not a political thing. This is about the cybers and the data and the PCAPs and the proof.
There's evidence or there's not. Right. Yep. That's what it comes down to.
I think.
Go ahead, Lee.
I think the work here has got to be done. There are some states they're auditing their elections. They're finding irregularities. They're not cyber irregularities. They're finding where people miscounted ballots or didn't clear out sample ballots, which is very different. I don't consider that to be the kind of evidence he would find.
That's not China logging in and switching votes.
That's a flesh and blood problem, not an IT problem, and we can't cyber around that. Not really.
So the one of the best things that I think about this whole Cyber-Symposium thing is that at the beginning of the symposium, MyPillow guy said, "I'll give anyone who can prove me wrong that I have evidence. If anybody can prove me wrong, I'll give them $5 million." And then. Okay, so nobody's proven me wrong. I'm going to take this offer off the table. Oh, and by the way, I still haven't given you the data that you asked for, or that I would promise that I would give to you. Crazy. So, like, totally shady.
Crazy. Our friends Gary and Justin have filed a civil lawsuit against Dallas County Sheriff Chad Leonard for the incident that occurred in September 2019. And we had Gary and Justin on the show. And many of you are familiar with this incident, right? So the latest development is basically there's a civil lawsuit that Gary and Justin have filed against the Dallas County Sheriff Department. And it's kind of interesting, right? Like, because this is America. Anyone can sue anyone. And I'm curious where everyone like kind of falls on this, right? Like, I side with the pen testers because that's, they're my people and I support our industry and I believe they were wronged. And I believe we've also heard both sides of the story on this one, and I still kind of side with our pen testers in Coalfire on this one. Of course, the Dallas County Sheriff is saying, yeah, bring it on. Like, he can sue us, they can sue us, but, it doesn't mean anything. And I'm like, really? Like, of course you're going to say that. Like, that's kind of where I'll pick a side in this one, right? I'm with the pen testers. Like, I'm sorry.
Yep.
That's
thoughts? I'm surprised it's taken this long.
Yeah, right?
Honestly, at the end of the day, like, I have to go the other way. Like, from a physical standpoint, things got messed up, and this is a risk. In fact, I mentioned this in my physical talk today for Wild West Hacking Fest, is that's a risk and a risk appetite as a physical pen tester that sometimes you have to walk that gray line, and there's a lot of gray lines in physical, and that's a risk that you assume. So at the end of the day, it was a bad day. Yeah, you had some bad publicity. You had some good publicity, like your name's out there. Coalfire had some good names. Like, you were in the right.
I'm going to disagree with you, Tyler, and say at the end of the day, they spent time in jail that they shouldn't have. Mm-hmm. And I think it also sets a precedent that by them filing this lawsuit, it's a statement for our community that says, like, we're not going to let this shit fly. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, whether they win or lose, I don't think that's the point. I think it's setting the precedent of, like, don't do this crap. Like, we're on the good side, and you made us the bad people, and that's not the case, right? And
so when you put it like that, I have to agree. I have to agree with you there. Like, I think that's a light that I would, and a stance that I would definitely stand behind. Like, we have to protect our pen testers. We have to protect the people doing the good work. I don't know if I would have went to civil. Like, I think.
Yeah, but like, this lawsuit could go nowhere, but it makes a statement, and the statement is that, like, we're authorized to do this test, and when the waters are muddied in just a weird way that this was, we're still the good people, right?
Yeah,
and I think it's making that statement. Yeah,
and Lee's got to comment in there, but then I got something to say.
So I was saying, I agree with you guys. I stand behind the pen testers. I mean, I'd want to make sure that their records were expunged. I don't know what the goal of the civil suit is. It's not really clear. I mean, are they trying to get compensation for spending the time in jail, or is this just the point?
No, I don't. I mean,
the point that this was just terrible.
No, I think Gary and Justin aren't looking for
the payout.
The payout. They're just looking to make a statement of, like, don't do this, right? Like, setting. I think they're setting a very valid precedent that when we do have permission, even when there's like weird nuances, like, we still have permission, and also it's for the greater good. It's for the good of the security of the company. And I think that's the message they're trying to send.
Yep. Yeah. So the lawsuit alleges negligence, false arrest, abuse of process, defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and malicious prosecution.
Right.
Yeah, like, basically, like, knock that shit off. Like, we're, like, that's the message it sends to me.
Prosecution against Dallas County and Sheriff Leonard after the two men showed their get-out-of-jail-free letter to Dallas County deputies, but were arrested anyways.
Right.
Like, this probably could have been solved, as we talked in the time, by a quick phone call. Yeah. From the letter, from the deputy to the person to get them out of bed. And it said, oh, yeah, no,
and
they work
for me. Most of the time, that's how it happens. Like that Darknet Diaries episode where the person, the dude broke his foot and stuff. Like, they did eventually get arrested by law enforcement, showed the get out of jail free card, and they're like, you know what? The conversations with law enforcement, they were so nice to us, and they just had questions, and we were totally open. Talked about our jobs, talked about the testing, talked about ways which we can improve security.
Dude, come here, watch this.
Yeah, like, talked about how we appreciate law enforcement, we respect law enforcement, we had to get a jail free card. Like, you're in the back of a cop car, and they're basically like, so tell us, like, what you do this for a living. Like, that's really cool, right? Like, that's how it should be.
You break into people's places to tell them how you broke into their places.
Like, that's how it. That's how it should be. Mutual respect.
Right.
Yeah.
That's when there's not politics, and like county and state government notoriously are always at odds, especially with technology. Having worked there, like, that is a battle that is interdepartmental, not just between county and state. Like, it can get pretty vicious between election cycles and different heads of departments. So I can see how it happened. It's always nice when it doesn't happen. There's really good people there.
So much more to talk about. Super duper security mode.
Yeah, what the hell is this?
It's all. So this is a proposed feature. It's not an official feature.
Oh,
I do want to say I really like Edge. I really appreciate Microsoft for their support of Linux because Teams I mean, they're constantly doing updates for Teams, and they're constantly doing updates for Edge on Linux, which is even still today kind of like I'm like, wow, Microsoft really.
It sounds wrong to say that.
It does, but like they're really supporting Linux, and they're really huge proponents of security, as evidenced by this particular feature that they're proposing that they're calling Super Duper Security Mode, which is an Edge configuration where they disable the JIT, just-in-time compiler for JavaScript, and tying that into control flow, enforcement technology, and arbitrary code guard, right? Because basically,
the big thing is, what do those last two things mean?
I'm not an expert in those two. I can say that the just-in-time compiler, right, it's funny. It's actually similar to the way Nessus would compile bytecode of its plugins to gain a performance benefit. JavaScript works the same way, that when you have JavaScript code, your browser will actually compile that into bytecode so that it can process that faster. And by disabling that, there's a security benefit, right, in doing that. Again, I'm kind of light on the details as exactly how that works.
Sure.
But they're also, in this change, enabling some further protections for your browser. Historically, the JavaScript interpreter is the thing that vulnerability researchers like to pick on, and attackers alike to pick on vulnerabilities for good reason. And this is kind of Microsoft's way to say, like, what if we went to like more extreme and put some more safeguards around the JavaScript interpreter? Which I applaud them for the efforts. I don't know if this is going to make it into the mainstream as a feature or not. I hope it does, because I think it's pretty cool. But the thing is, it's going to impact your performance in a negative manner, potentially, if you do this. But like the way I use Edge, I would enable this feature, which would disable the just-in-time compiler, make it slower, but make it more secure.
Yep. And now, thinking about this, like two things, and then Lee, I know you want your comment here. One, that maybe this shouldn't be the super duper secure mode. Maybe this should just be secure mode.
Yeah, like advanced secure mode or something.
And the regular mode is whatever their advanced secure mode is, and so forth. The other one is, it is very much now about the browsers and stuff. It's for the most part, it's not about the speed in which you get your data, which makes your browser slow. It's about how fast you can render said data and so forth. And really, is your data going to render any faster on your Core i9 processor or your Core i3 processor? Is it really, we're no longer in the time when we have to consider the order of the bytes in our packet, because it needs to process them, in some other order.
Is it bytecode versus interpreted code? And what you're saying, Larry, is like with our modern processors, does that really make a difference performance-wise?
Honestly, would you notice the difference performance-wise that your web page took 0.0001 microseconds longer to load?
Most of us, all of us on the show, and most of us listening, we build systems and buy systems that are way over spec and probably wouldn't notice a difference. I think the users that are very budget conscious, that are maybe using the Chromebook or the kind of not as fast systems, basically may notice a difference.
I'd argue that
depends on if you have 1,000 tabs open or 100 tabs open.
Yeah, that's true too.
Like Tyler, I'm like asking you how you know this, right? And even still, like, should 1,000 tabs make a difference on what active content that you're currently loading?
Probably not. Like there's some cool protections in disabling just-in-time compilers that eliminates a lot of some of the sandbox evasion stuff and the ability to jump code for WebSockets. Like, that's pretty cool. Like, I think I would take the speed versus security trade-off in this case, especially in a browser.
Yeah, but you and I, Tyler, that we're going to build like way more RAM and CPU into our systems than we actually need.
It's never going to be
negligible. And I'd argue the average user wouldn't be able to tell. Lee.
Yeah. So what I was going to say is that when I was reading about this earlier, the JIT is getting C++ level speed out of JavaScript, which is actually pretty impressive.
Correct.
So I can see why they should not turn it off. But something like 45% of all V8 JIT vulnerabilities are are in the JIT. I mean, it's like crazy amount of vulnerabilities here. So they said somewhere else, by the way, they're not going to go, if they go live, it's not going to be called super duper secure mode. They're going to give it a better name. But that's what it's called today in what is it? The Canary, Dev, and Beta versions of Edge. So you can try it out.
I like super duper secure mode.
I was kind of hoping they'd keep that name.
Yeah, right. Like I like that. I think that's cool.
But marketing is going to get a hold of it and say, "What the hell?"
That's really funny.
But yeah, no, I think it's a cool experiment. I'd like to see how it works out. 'Cause, I'd like to turn off the JIT other places too.
Turn that JIT off, will you?
Yes. I see what you did
That's great talk.
That's a great episode name right there. Turn that JIT off. We could go so many different places. Do we go Zoom or do we go Apple? Let's go Apple. The EFF had a post. And so basically this is my story number 3. The gist of it is there are, and we've had Chris Ednaghi on the show, right? Like there are horrible people in the world that are sexual predators that have to do with, pedophilia and things like that. And the way that works its way into privacy is how do you monitor communications to make sure that you can still prosecute pedophiles but still preserve people's privacy? It's a horrible thing to think about. Like, it's just an awful thing to go to like an awful place in a very kind of somber note on this subject. Apple has a very interesting take on this, right? And so all the major technology providers, social media networks are trying to deal with this issue. Apple has a very interesting take. So they're introducing this feature. The EFF is kind of leaning towards this is a backdoor, and I totally get like their take on this, that this could be exploited and invade people's privacy. But how does someone like an Apple in this example, who has been a really great proponent of preserving people's privacy, but also allow law enforcement and folks like us to do investigations and prosecute pedophiles? Because if you give, we'll talk about end-to-end encryption, right? If you give end-to-end encryption and these technologies to everyone, they're going to be used by criminals and people like pedophiles, which is gross and disgusting. So Apple's got this feature where they can turn on this feature for family members in your Apple iCloud account that are under the age of 13 and under, I believe is the threshold they set, where basically like the images go through an AI engine where they're determining whether it is child pornography or not. I'm kind of behind that. Like, in that sense, I'm like, that's a really interesting.
And you can turn it on and off.
And you can turn it on and off. It's an interesting compromise, right? So, it sends a photo to another minor who does not have these features enabled. They do not receive a notification that iMessage considers their image to be explicit, or that the recipient's parent will be notified. So, like, basically, as a parent, you're notified that this is happening. The recipient's parents will be informed of the content without the sender consenting to their involvement. Once sent or received, the sexually explicit image cannot be deleted from the under 13-year-old's device. And the article goes into great detail on all different aspects. I tried to capture
this sounds a lot different than I imagined it. Like I imagined it like being on my phone or my wife's phone or your phone, and you take a picture of the kid in the bathtub that's for your own personal, like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, and I think a parent taking a picture of a child would, because you're over 13 years of age, would not be subjected to this level of scrutiny.
Which is, in my opinion, probably the worst. That's not, we're not targeting the right market here, I would imagine.
Maybe not. Maybe not.
And it's not like you're taking a picture of your kid in the bathtub to be malicious and texting it to grandma.
Right.
Perfectly legitimate uses for stuff like that.
Yeah, I think there'd be too many false positives with that.
And like you got the washcloth placed properly so it's not weird and that stuff. And
we've all taken pictures of our kids and had to censor them if we're going to see. We've all done that, right? We've all done that.
Yeah, I can think of one.
I mean, let's be honest. Like when they're your kids and they're running around in the comfort of your own home. Like clothing is totally optional.
I can think of one of our friends in common that posts pictures to Facebook all the time and censors them. It's censored because it's no pants, no problem. We're going to play video games, no pants on. Like totally. You know exactly who I'm talking about.
His kids do not like to wear clothes, but you know that as a parent, like that happens.
That happens.
Yeah,
it happens.
But as Apple, how do you
differentiate between
that? Because there's lines here, of course.
That's got to be some crazy internal meetings to kind of weigh through some of the pros and cons.
Can you imagine, like, Tyler? That's a great point.
As a planet, like a device that affects literally millions of people. Like, what is our responsibility, and like, how do we circumnavigate that? That's.
I think the EFF, I think, is doing their job, but I also believe that Apple's doing their job as well. Like, I'm kind of neutral on this one, right? Like, I see both sides of it. I get the EFF wanting to protect our privacy, and I respect them for that. I also see Apple wanting to combat this problem.
And
do Tyler, to your point, like I respect them for that too. Like I know they've had these conversations and they want to solve the problem.
I think they're doing the right thing, but I think it's a really hard problem to solve. So
I'm just worried about false positives here. It seems
me too.
Like a false,
everyone is. A
false positive on this can ruin someone's life.
And a false negative can do the same thing too.
Absolutely.
Right? So it's tricky business. I implore everyone to go read the article. I mean, it's a very in-depth article from the EFF, very well written. You should go read it and form your own opinions, basically. And speaking of end-to-end encryption, Zoom is paying $85 million for lying about end-to-end encryption. Like basically, Zoom got called out for trying to redefine end-to-end encryption. And like the crux of this, like you can read the article and the quote and everything. Like basically this comes down to end-to-end encryption is Larry and I generate our own key sets and we encrypt data between each other.
Right.
That is true end-to-end.
That is
end-to-end encryption.
Nothing about true. Is.
This is Whitfield and Diffie, right? Like in its truest sense, Larry and I have public and private keys. We exchange public keys. We encrypt each other's data. Only Larry can read the messages I send to him, and vice versa, right? Zoom kind of said, "Well, we're going to, use the keys on the server side," and thankfully now we've gotten to a point in, I think, the laws and litigation where they notice things like this and go, well, if someone compromises Zoom's servers, they can own all of the keys and get people's data. Versus if you were to do that in the previous example, you'd have to compromise Larry's machine or my machine. And if we were diligent about our key management, we would have a passphrase on our private keys. You would have to crack that as well, and or keystroke logger or whatever, right? Individual machines would have to be compromised versus one central place. Right. And that's basically the crux of this class action lawsuit that Zoom ended up paying $85 million to people to say,
will be paying.
Like, it wasn't really end-to-end encryption.
Each Zoom user active during that period will receive between $15 and $25.
Yeah, not like a whole lot.
Was that money worth them shifting off of that during the COVID crisis where they had all the new inbound customers? Like, this seems probably like a small business risk decision that maybe they just had to deal with because they were trying to solve that and they were redefining
I know the impact.
To quote, with the pandemic boosting its video conferencing business, Zoom more than quadrupled its annual revenue from $622.7 million to $2.7 billion in the 12 months ending January 31st, 2021.
I think they regret.
Yeah, right.
They regret what how it was phrased and what they did, but it didn't impact their business. But it also set a precedent that as a company, you can't redefine what end-to-end encryption means. Right. And that's a positive thing. I don't want to see Zoom drag through the mud and, like end as a business. That's not, no. I think the important thing is they made an oops. They're they're taking it as as it is. They're paying their $85 million. They're learning from it, and other people are learning from it as well. That you can't
arguably, it was a slap on the wrist.
Yeah,
exactly. $85 million out of $2.7 billion for that period. Slap on the wrist. But it's a good slap on the wrist because everybody learned.
Do you remember when Zoom was first published their white paper on how they were going to do end-to-end encryption for Zoom?
Yep.
Because I remember reading that, and it really was end-to-end encryption, and it's not what they implemented. I mean, they really had keys set by, Paul and Larry be setting and exchanging keys for their session. And then they just they downshifted to TLS, because remember they were going to do it for the paid, and then they said, we'll do it for everybody for free. Well, obviously that was the compromise.
Yeah.
I don't like that they tried to redefine end-to-end, but...
Right. Yeah, the old school example is OTR. New school signal, right? Like it needs to be a true end-to-end.
Yeah.
Paul, your number 10 is very interesting to me, personally.
I think his number 2 is particularly interesting. Oh, wait, no. Oh, it's different. Number 10.
Number 10, crypto mining botnet modifies CPU configurations.
There's a lesson to be learned here.
We need more power, Captain, right? So Optics, who I love as a company, they're just awesome company. And so their researchers spotted a crypto mining botnet. And basically what they were doing was there is pre-fetching in the kernel, right? Which we ended up with Spectre and Meltdown, right, as some of the execution paths. But pre-fetching in this example led to, in crypto mining, a reduced performance. So what this botnet did was disable the prefetching, load the driver that does the crypto mining, disable the prefetching to be able to do the crypto mining at a higher performance level.
How did they do that, though? Are they accessing this via UEFI, or are they doing this via a motherboard utility interaction with Linux, or can you configure this kernel flag with inside of the file system?
My guess would be this is a kernel driver that tells the kernel to do prefetching or not, and then the kernel handles. My guess, again, second guess, is that the kernel handles the communication with the CPU and the hardware to enable to disable that, right? Like Wheel did and you'll hear it next week. We did an interview with Wheel about the Sequoia vulnerability. Kind of talked about the interfaces to the kernel, like the user land interfaces to the kernel and the kernel code, separate from the kernel drivers, separate from all the user land binaries like systemd, which is a very, very fascinating when you think about that from a security perspective, how all those things interoperate. So my guess is you can load a kernel driver that also dictates to the kernel how it should handle prefetching and end up disabling that, really independent of the architecture, because the kernel is going to handle that interface with the hardware.
That's pretty legit. Like, overclocking malware is like we've talked about the UEFI.
It kind of is overclocking hardware, Tyler. That's a great way to put it.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So it looks like they're using an OS level driver called the model specific register driver that will do it. So they're adding basically a driver in there at the OS level. They're not screwing around with the BIOS to disable it. It looks like it's a registry you can hit. I'm not registry.
Right, 15% speed boost, which isn't bad.
Yeah, I don't think you can do this in Windows. Just thinking through how I operate and mess around with Windows at this level, like I think there are hardware interactions and protections there. Like it doesn't work the same way with the file system. But I may be wrong.
But it's funny you say that, Tyler, because Lee and I explored that with Wheel, like the whole concept of Linux in allowing the user more control has, in some sense, like a more difficult job enforcing rules. Like the whole premise of Sequoia, when you hear the interview next week, right, is the ability to create a 1 gigabyte in size directory tree. That's not files within your file system. That is a directory tree that exceeds 1 gigabyte. And I posed the question to Wheel, and you'll hear his answer, like, how do you rationalize like the usability versus security kind of argument where like, what is the use case for creating a directory structure, right? And Linux errors on that side of giving the user control versus putting the protections in place. And it just really, it's a fascinating aspect. You get to hear Wheel's thoughts on that, which is it's really cool.
Yeah. That was neat.
Also neat is the glowworm attack. Did you guys see this one?
I did not see this one.
So this is in the class of things we've talked about in the past, where you can vary, for example, vary the fan speed of the fans within your computer because they emit a different harmonic frequency that can be measured by a listening device.
And arguably, they're also being controlled by PWM, which PWM at a specific speed can be used to create RF energy.
Yep.
So, okay.
Holy crap. What?
Yeah.
Like the fans can create RF energy.
Well, not the fan, the controller that tells the fan how fast to spin.
Emits RF energy.
Yes. So if we think about, so I'm going to go back to when we had Faith on the show when we talked about Vapor Trail. And Vapor Trail took a Raspberry Pi and toggled one of the GPIO pins to create RF energy radio signals. That's PWM. That's pulse width modulation. It's PWM.
Crazy.
And the fans are controlled by PWM.
Right.
And that was one of the things that we theorized is like, great, we're using a Raspberry Pi, but what if we can find something that we can use to control the PWM of the fans in a system to do the exfil that way?
So this,
moving along.
This says recovering sound by analyzing optical emanations from a device's power indicator LED. So the response of the power indicator LED. Right, the response of the power indicator LED of various devices to sound and show that there's an optical correlation between the sound that is played by the connected speakers and the intensity of the power indicator LED.
Right.
Yep, I can see that because go ahead, Tyler.
There were power companies that were doing this like a while back. Like they would know what you were watching on TV, television, which program station, based on the power draw.
Because different colors, on the screen drew different amounts of power from your backlighting and so forth. They could tell at the power meter what shows you were watching because they would fingerprint the various scenes in the shows. You could tell, what the intensity of all the pixels were and all that type of stuff on your LED screens. So very similar. So you increase the PWM, it uses more energy, means the power light on the front of your computer dims just a little bit.
That's the gist of this one, right?
Yep.
Right.
And you could tell that the fans were changing speed audio.
This is how you get by air gap networks, and there's lots of governments that do this kind of stupid shit.
But this is like this is like the academic stuff that we read about now that 10 years from now we read about in an actual attack, right?
Tyler, go ahead, Lee.
So one of the things, though, is there are, for what Tyler was describing, there are TSG disconnect devices you put in line with things like speakers and microphones that do physical disconnects and you remove a lot of this kind of hardware to make it you harden the machines from a lot of these kinds of attacks. The problem is the average person air gapping their stuff like a control system, they're not going to do all that.
Yeah. Most of this stuff, Lee, to your point, can be disabled in the BIOS. I mean, those of us that are diligent will... If I know I'm not going to use the onboard sound controller, I disable that in the BIOS, right? Because that limits my interrupts and it just makes it up for a cleaner system. If I'm not, it kind of goes back to like old school hardening. If I'm not using it, I'm going to disable it. But what you're saying in this article is also saying is like when you get down to that level, you can disable the power indicators on the LED lights, right? That indicate power. Because that could be a potential attack vector, which I think is really enlightening.
And Tyler's like, "Oh, there are nation states doing these stupid things." Like, and you say these are the academic things we read
now
that are going to be
5-10 years later.
They're definite things we have to think about, and they will carry forward.
Build the detection now. Build the detection
software,
now.
aka BIOS disablement, is not always accepted as good enough.
I think that's where Encryptium is really way ahead of their game, and
agreed.
Honestly thinking through like even stuff we were working on 3 or 4 years ago, like this is where the attacks are moving to, is at hardware level of persistence, supply chain attacks, integrating into chips, finding those, knock bits or knock pins on chips, and the ability to do those. Like that's the level that we're having to deal with, and we still have people having a hard time taking away local admin. So
yeah, it's a great point.
Yep.
Pick your battles, right?
We still got people dealing with ransomware. Which is my story number 13, right? In the quadruple extortion. Double secret quadruple extortion.
Woo!
So we know about encryption. They're going to encrypt your data, right?
Yep.
We know about data theft.
They're going to steal it before they encrypt it.
They're going to steal it.
Yep.
We know about denial of service. They're going to cut off your access to the data. But now there's, I think the new one is really harassment. They contact customers, business partners, employees, and media and tell them the organization was hacked.
And that they should pay the ransom.
That's
leverage, right? Like this all goes back to the psychology of how can you gain leverage in order to get someone to do something. And I think it's going to get nastier and nastier. You start to look at some of the newer stuff where they're starting to target ESXi hosts and leverage the CLI for ESXi and just encrypt your ESXi, like that's all of your host, and getting back up because your backups are not available to get running on ESXi again. That's a problem. Like bare metal restoration of large organizations at the virtual hypervisor level is very, very difficult.
I read an article too that would like basically kind of analyzing the whole backup strategy where, I'm resilient to ransomware because I have a backup, and basically evangelizing like attackers know this too. And they're going to go after your backups. Because we all know.
Time to recovery and feasibility of recovery from backups in most organizations, while you do have it, unless you're very, very small, that feasibility is exponentially smaller. In fact, especially if you have things like cloud or offsite, getting that data back is so slow, and or you have to wait to ship drives, and the level of data that you have may not be able to be shipped, and restoring back to something like an iSCSI vSAN that's in a mirrored mode on a VMware ESXi host cluster. Like, you don't just restore from backup for something like that, or even Active Directory. Right? That just is not how that works.
I guess I don't. I've got my evil hat on, and I look at, like, let's say you're using a SaaS provider, right, for your backups, a cloud kind of backup thing. Like, maybe I just take over that service. I reset your password. I lock you out of that service, and then I ransomware the whole environment.
So I think that's the next. I think that's the next big ransomware that I've been thinking about is taking over accounts like your Azure cloud account where Active Directory is online. You set a new 2-factor and recover email. Or you take over that and have a new 2-factor on there. How do you get that back, and how do you start to recover from something like that? You just
remove the organization's ability to restore from backup and then do your ransomware, which I hate to SaaS. I hate to verbalize that, but I want people to be aware of that too, right?
Well,
SaaS and single sign-on are the two-headed dragon. Like this is a talk we've talked about a ton of times. Like this will become a problem from a ransomware standpoint just by taking over creds, and then you don't even have to ransom it. You're ransoming access at this point,
right?
Which takes a ton of the level of effort and abilities of the attacker, like down a whole notch and a whole bar.
It's kind of similar to like your SIM swapping, right? Like you're basically just pulling the rug out from underneath people. Like, I don't care what security you had. Like, if I can take over your accounts, I win. That's what it comes down to.
Yep. I have a friend that got SIM swapped and got his Bitcoin stolen. And the perpetrator got caught, and they are now having to pay restitution.
Yep.
The best part is they're not being told to be paid monetary restitution.
It's Bitcoin restitution. And Bitcoin if Bitcoin's higher than it was before,
yep. Like even
you make out,
exactly,
yep.
The problem is that do you actually think someone's who's going to prison is going to be able to pay off a couple $1 million in Bitcoin?
Yeah, right. That's well, there was $600 million in Bitcoin that was stolen, and we had that. I think many of us had that story, right?
You did. I know
it was basically like they stole $600 million in cryptocurrency, not just Bitcoin, Monero, and others. And one of the firms was like, great, like good for you. You stole $600 million. Like you think that's not gonna draw the attention of law enforcement, like maybe you just want to give some of that back and avoid like this whole mess. And they started giving some of it back. I don't know. I read different articles that different amounts that they had to give it back in different, cryptocurrencies.
They didn't want to crash. They want to crash the currency as well. I heard there were some things about like the currency market and like what damage or price spike or drop that was going to cause. Maybe there was some external influence on identifying who these people were, and they were asked in not as nice words to consider their fate and what they're doing with the money. Like that's a pretty common thing. There's companies that do digital asset recovery.
If hypothetically I steal enough Bitcoin that I can affect the market, that it's not law enforcement I'm worried about, it's hypothetically the Russian mafia that's like, yeah, hey Paul, like, yeah, no, like you're not going to crash Bitcoin because we're going to kill your family, and I just give all that back. Like that's kind of how it played out. Yeah.
Most of those don't make the news. Like digital asset recovery is a well-known market for people to play in crypto, and there's a few names that and you work with these hackers to go and do asset recovery, hunt people down, find things, and you politely or impolitely utilize the leverage for whatever client you're working for to gain that money back or access back, whether that's rehacking them and or black bagging them, like depending on the country, depending on the situation, and
it's like, criminals hacking criminals basically at that point to preserve the integrity of the illegitimate market. Wow, that's really interesting, Tyler. That's deep. That's deep.
Yeah.
Speaking of ransomware, Accenture, anyone? That was like you couldn't not read the news this week without learning that Accenture was ransomware, that it was Lockbit, that there was some hand waving involved, that reports are that 2,500 computers of Accenture partners and employees were compromised.
That's a high number.
There was a data dump. Unofficially,
I've been looking.
I've seen like there's a data dump. Like
it's Lockbit 2.0. This is the Lockbit 2.0 one, right?
Yeah, this was like you could go download Accenture's data. Basically, is what I saw.
Yeah, that's kind of terrifying.
Yeah, that's kind of bad.
Yikes!
MSPs are super high risk. Like they have high visibility. I mean, we've seen this from supply chain, and we know this. But the fact that ransomware is targeting them and at such a low amount, like 50 million from a Accenture standpoint, like that's bad publicity, but that's a pretty small number given the number of contracts and companies that you actually integrate with. So I don't know. This is probably going to be another trend, is MSPs are just going to continue to be a big target, and I'm surprised it was so small.
That's scary. What else we got?
Well, I had hoped we'd have Jeff on the show because my number 2 and 3 are definitely trolling Jeff. Although I guess I fall into the number 3 of the senior citizens. I'm not affected by it. I'm in the senior citizen category where all this PII from seniors was taken.
Yeah, where was that taken from, Lee?
Wasn't it a misconfigured S3 bucket again?
Well, what was the organization that was targeted?
Was a senior advocate or senior advice?
Senior advisor.
Okay.
Advisor. Financial advisor, if I remember right. For
why it was their leads. It was their leads for anybody turning senior, and I'm assuming they pulled that from Social Security Administration or demographic from ad tracking. With a very large amount of personal information for leads to, offer senior advice or senior advisories.
Yeah, why the article, the article states that senior citizens are at a higher risk of online fraud. Why is that? Is that
because they're not technically
saved up because they've saved up more for retirement and they're going after those funds? Is that?
Well, they've saved up, but they're also not technically savvy, right?
Yeah. It's a combination.
I think part of it is that there's probably more assets involved, but part of it is also as you're talking about citizens that are older, they're not as sharp as they were when they were younger, like Tyler or you guys and even me. So they're trusting more people to help them manage their affairs. And if those people get compromised or don't do the right thing, it's a greater return, right? It's hundreds of people instead of just yourself getting compromised. And I mean, we're moving so fast; it's confusing. As you get older, sometimes your mental acuity goes down, and it's hard to keep up with this stuff. And you've got to rely on advice. And they're not necessarily as savvy on not as providing all that PII to a service to help them out.
That's interesting.
And again, how much PII have all of us got out there?
Yeah.
I don't know if I want to know.
Yeah. So many breaches, right? Like OPM.
Yeah, I'm assuming they're going to use a lot of that for like social engineering and furthering attacks, ransomware.
I mean, how many of them are going to realize that call about their car warranty is bogus?
That's
right.
Yeah. We talked about that a couple of weeks ago. That's still like a thorn in my side, right? Like how your DMV is selling your data, and that whole rabbit hole is really, it's really sad.
Well, here, let me help you get upset with your Medicare provider needs to be updated. Let me change who you're sending your money to. Right? Same thing. And it's annoying as all hell.
One of the things that really concerns me too is on the OT and ICS side, INFRA HALT was a set of 14 vulnerabilities discovered by Forescout and JFrog, some of which focuses on the security of TCP/IP based attacks, code execution, denial of service, information leaks. More concerning for me is the I would assume one packet DNS response leading to remote code execution. That is not the first time we've seen that, right? Like this is a whole nother round of that. Like if you go back in history, you can kind of point to at least two, like roughly off the top of my head, that have exploited this style of vulnerability that in the TCP/IP stack, I want to say specifically with DNS, right? You send out a DNS request, the response is malformed, and it leads to remote code execution, specifically on these ICS devices. And Forescout has done a ton of research on this. JFrog, to me, is kind of a new player in this kind of realm, but certainly is doing a lot of the security research as well. That's just kind of interesting. Kind of scary. Because, like, when and how are these devices going to be patched? That's the question.
Yeah.
Yeah, PLCs and real-time operating systems with remote code execution or even exploit code in general, like these are designed to be deployed and left in line for 10 to 20 years. Like this is not easy to patch, and a lot of places aren't going to patch. So this is going to be a problem for many things, like for the foreseeable future. Like this is probably a pretty big deal.
Well, and you know, similar to the HTTP server on these devices, some of the PLCs that you mentioned may not have a web server management interface, right? But they've got a TCP/IP stack that is vulnerable, specifically with things like DNS, because they're trying to crunch down. Like it's even more crunched down than your home router. Like your home router has to have a web management interface.
Yep.
On a PLC, it doesn't really need a web management interface, but it needs a TCP/IP stack. Therefore, if I'm a manufacturer and I'm making PLCs, I'm going to go to, I'll use China as an example, but many different examples. I'm going to go acquire a TCP/IP stack from my device because I don't want to write it myself. I mean, you can't really fault, like, if Larry and I were to create a company and be like, we're going to make PLCs, like, okay, Larry, like, let's go write like a TCP/IP stack.
No.
Larry, like,
dude, there are like 6 companies we can license that shit from.
Exactly. And like all of those 6 have some level of vulnerabilities that end up in the same cycle.
We actually talked about one of these fairly recently that pretty much every one of these IP stacks has some pretty horrible vulnerability in them. Yeah, Lee.
I would say you wouldn't even work that hard, Paul. You'd go out. You're looking for you got your IoT device. You want Ethernet. You run Wi-Fi and maybe Bluetooth. You're just going to go buy the system on the chip that includes the whole TCP/IP stack in it. You're not going to
build that.
Right? Now, this reminds me of
pop it in and go.
This reminds me of a conversation I had with Josh Wright today. We were talking about something, and he's like, "Oh yeah, like this is in Python, so it should be totally easy. And by the way, I wrote my own PCAP parser, so we don't have to worry about an external library anymore." And I'm like, "Why would you do that?"
Because he's Josh.
There's libraries that parse PCAPs. Like he says, yeah, it's almost done. I'm like, what? Why would you go through this level of pain?
Because he's Josh.
Because he's Josh. Yeah.
But I also I want to go, and I believe it was still again Mike Poor. We need to get Mike back on the show because he's so.
I might know a guy.
He's so prolific, right? But and I believe it was Mike in the many classes I took with Mike. One of them. He was like, RFCs are meant for interpretation. I don't know if it was...
This might have been Josh, but...
It might have been Josh or Mike or Steven or but they all kind of had the same...
Yeah.
They might have all talked about it in my time training with those incredibly intelligent and amazing people, right? And But they were like, RFCs are meant for interpretation.
Sure.
So when you read the TCP/IP specification, there's multiple RFCs that define how you should write your code.
And that's the keyword should.
Should is you're absolutely right.
Not
like
must.
Should.
Not must. Or will.
Like it's left to interpretation. So developers have this interpretation as to how they should write the code, and they develop a TCP/IP stack that gets embedded in these devices that is now vulnerable because they interpreted it I don't want to say maybe not incorrectly in a security sense, right? Like maybe correct. I don't want to default the developers, right? Having been a developer, like I would have my interpretation of that.
Yeah. Prime example. We go back to the Johnny Cash, Dave Maynard,
right? And drivers,
yeah, and 802.11 SSID element can be between 0 and 32 octets. Can be between 0 and 32 octets.
Can be.
Yet the field in which you define the variable length field can be defined as FF, which is 255 bytes. But it shouldn't. The spec said it should be no more than 32. But you can define up to 255. So the developer says, "Oh, only 32. I'll only allocate 32 bytes on the stack, maximum." And then that comes in, and they don't validate that it's over 32.
Hold on, Lee, does that sound familiar with the Linux kernel? How long should we talked about this with the wheel? How long should a directory structure be? That was a hard-coded element that changed over time, and some developers implemented it, rightfully so, the way it was defined at the time they were writing the code.
Yep.
And then it was updated, and new developers implemented it maybe in a different way, but now you've got different interpretations. It is the crux of so many vulnerabilities, right?
Yeah. I remember when I was learning about programming, I think they had something along the lines of when you have limits, it should be like 1, 2, 3, or infinite. You don't, you code for a very long value, and you don't try and allow for something in the middle. Because then you're going to wind up in overflow land. But I realize
but you get like different iterations of that, right? Like that's how we get vulnerable code, right? Is everyone interprets it differently, and then the kind of hard limits kind of change over time, and how well have you kept up in your code. And when we talk about things like the Linux kernel or a TCP/IP stack, we're talking about thousands or millions of lines of code to make sure that you're interpreting it correctly. That was the amazing thing for me, in talking to Wheel, to talk about how we have... MITRE has done a great job with the common weakness enumeration, right? In defining type conversions and path traversal and the various aspects in categories of vulnerabilities. And I'm like, so it was a type conversion. And Will was like, no, it was a type conversion. Yes, Paul, you're correct. But also, it was the developer's interpretation of what the hard limits are. And it was the combination of an incorrect type conversion coupled with the incorrect interpretation of the standard, right? Yeah. That was really like, I've been doing security a long time. That was really prolific for me to think about, that it's not just about introducing a well-defined flaw, like a buffer overflow, like a stack-based buffer over, like that's one type of flaw, but it's also like that combination of how you interpreted the standard and the limits coupled with these very well-defined types of vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
So recently I bought a couple of books, the 24 Deadly Sins of Software Security. It's like 10, 15 years old. Because I want to understand all these different kind of exploit avenues that largely for the past 20, 30, 40 years haven't changed.
Yeah.
Right? That just is so interesting to me, how some of these things haven't changed. It was actually on the show when we were talking about the common weaknesses in enumeration and how, well, so I have it in my car. 24 Deadly Sins of Software Security, Programming Flaws and How to Fix Them. That was like 10 plus years ago. This book was released. Michael Howard and David LeBlanc, John Viega are the authors. And they're referenced in so many of the common weaknesses in enumeration that I'm like, I gotta go. I want to understand these. Like, these are, because they're still relevant today.
Yep. It's terrifying.
In a sense, it is very terrifying.
Speaking of relevant today, Lee, your story number 7.
Right.
And relevant for today in that Goose found this story.
Oh, yeah.
And Goose, the man running behind the things, behind the scenes,
production engineer,
without Johnny today, so he's all by himself.
Right,
killing it.
This was covered at Black Hat this year, and it's basically he had given me the presentation link, but the article here kind of explains it. That what they're doing is they're downgrading the number of DNS servers used by Let's Encrypt to verify that you're legitimately requesting a cert for your domain to just a single one, and then pretty much you have that DNS server lie about what it's for, and Let's Encrypt grant you the certificate for that bogus target with the desired domain name. And they found that they could do this on like 25% of servers out there. They could make this happen. And I'm like, holy crap. I mean, we've been looking at Let's Encrypt as really the totally easy button to have decent, encrypted connections on our web servers. And look at that. We can make it less reliable still. I mean, I know it's free.
Yeah, but one of the researchers was Dr. Haya Schulman, who we're trying to get on the show to have her talk about this particular vulnerability. Yeah,
that could be a cool segment.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm looking forward to that. I was kind of enamored with it. This came behind the scenes of Security Weekly, right? We talk about who we're going to bring on the show, who's doing interesting research. This was one of the ones on our list. So, yeah. It's really
But they did say that this is not just Let's Encrypt. Like, that's the target and some of the tests they did. But there were other CAs where they were able to utilize some of the same techniques in order to get certificate authorities to do interesting things. So it's kind of an interesting attack path. I'm not sure how they're doing this. This is one I've got on my watch list, but I have not finished yet.
It's kind of amazing when you think about how long SSL and TLS has been around, that we're still finding ways around that in various implementations of it, right?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, isn't that what we keep coming back to with stuff like that? It's the implementation that gets screwed up, not
always,
the protocol.
Always.
Yeah.
One of my favorite reads, Larry, you were talking about books recommendations, right?
Yep.
Steve Levy, Crypto. I think it's called Crypto.
Really?
The book is called Crypto by Steve Levy. And he kind of goes through like how long that's been around, like when the first standards were created, how they were iterated, kind of over time, and how is interesting to me is how we're still finding flaws in them today. Given, I mean, you can trace that stuff back to the 70s, right? Those crypto standards.
Yeah. Related, when I said when I were going to leave here last week, you need to help me pick a book.
We never did.
So I picked one. I started with Confessions of a CIA Spy, which was like 3 hours, almost
Peter
4
Warmka?
hours.
That's Peter Warmka. We have him on the show.
And I started listening, and I was like, and I switched to something else, and I went to The Hacker Crackdown by Bruce Sterling.
Yes.
Right. So, like, I just did the
Hacker Crackdown is like required reading, and when I listened to that, I was like, this is required reading for everyone in our field.
We did Masters to Deception,
also required reading,
and so now I'm doing this one afterwards. And I know I've read it before, but it's been so many years because I also have Cyberpunk by John Markoff and Katie Hafner in my library that I need
also
to listen
required
to.
reading. Hacker Crackdown is interesting because it talks about kind of the government kind of take on going after hackers at the time, like air quotes hackers at the time, when you're like, were they really criminals? Like, really?
Yeah.
And they talk about like, oh, we seized all the hard drives and floppies, and like in today's standards that would be 500 megabytes, and we seized 1,000 hard drives and floppies. Like, there's like analogies like that. You're like, wow, that's kind of amazing.
So, and that said, I'm also listening to Code Girls with
I haven't listened to that one yet, but it's on my list.
It's interesting. I find it interesting. I find it fascinating. It was really intended for our two girls. The 13-year-old, I think, is getting part of it. The 7-year-old, the 8-year-old is going way over her head because she doesn't understand the whole concept of World War I, World War II, where the 13-year-old does.
I implore everyone to listen to these books with your children.
Yeah.
In the car because I'm listening to Bruce Schneier, Click Here to Kill Everyone.
Oh.
If you're just getting started in the field, I think it's a great read. For many of us, you could probably skip it, right? But he talks about, Bruce does a great job of kind of breaking down the major kind of attacks like NotPetya and Stuxnet and like the significance of them. If you're just getting in the field, great read. Good one to listen to with your kids because they're like, wait, like they turn off the power, Dad? Like in like hackers can turn off the power. Like it's a good book for that, but for most of us, it's kind of
the other one is Apollo 13 by Jim Lovell.
Yep.
And my wife and I had listened to that. So this is like Jim Lovell, who was one of the mission commander type folks, and telling his story of it and so forth, like the guy who was there as opposed to some of the astronauts and so forth. And the
you gotta get your girls on Cory Doctorow, Little Brother.
Oh my god,
Cory Doctorow has it's a great point, Tyler. Cory Doctorow has some great books as well.
I love that book.
Yep, same. And that's funny. Both of the kids have listened to Ready Player One and Ready Player Two.
Yeah. And great movies too. My kids like the movie.
The language is also questionable in both of those.
Sure.
Some of the scenes are questionable in for sexual content for the 8-year-old.
I haven't listened to the book, but we watched the movie.
Yep.
Which is kind of shameful because I do want to.
And you know what?
The book is always better than the movie, right?
The movie, in my opinion, is no worse than The Princess Bride. And we make fun with our 13-year-old every time. Is this a kissing book? Whenever a kissing scene comes on, from The Princess Bride, and then there's red faces all around, and it's a joke.
But like kids typically are into video games, and they're like, what's Ready Player? I'm like, guys, it's about video games. Like you're gonna like it, and they watch the movie and they're like, oh, Dad, that was really cool.
Yeah, and like it's video games and 80s culture, which your parents grew up with, and like. The radio in my wife's car, XM radio, was on the 80s station. So they know all of the music.
But you can also, I think it's a great transition to go, probably read the book more than the movie. But like Ender's Game is probably a better one, right? For them to listen to.
Oh my.
Or watch. In either case, I think it's great. It's great. But Cyberpunk.
Yep.
Cyberpunk is one I really like because you got to listen to or read Cuckoo's Egg first, then go to Cyberpunk. Right? Probably Takedown right? Okay. Which chronicles Kevin Mitnick from the Kimimura kind of perspective, right? And then Cuckoo's Egg, and then Cyberpunk, because Cyberpunk goes through Mitnick, Morris, and the German hackers that are behind.
And that was
Pengo, and the other hackers on the German side.
Which was the Pengo from
Cuckoo's Egg.
Yeah, Cuckoo's Egg.
So definitely go. We have so many book recommendations, but definitely go through all of those.
And that reminds me, I got to go follow up about my quote nomination to the board for the cybersecurity canon.
Yeah,
there was some delays.
So I just want to say our intern, whose name is Dylan, it was his birthday, and one of our mutual friends was like, "Hey Paul, what do I get Dylan? Like, I want to get him a book or something." I'm like, "Cuckoo's Egg is really what kind of got me into computer security." I'm like, "You should get him that." And he was like, "That was a really awesome recommendation." So I think people should really start with Cuckoo's Egg. It's very accessible, and then you can kind of segue into the other. You go into Takedown with Kimimura, right? And you go into Cyberpunk. Shimamura, thank you.
Shimamura,
and you go into Cyberpunk, and it gives you even more of that backstory into that.
Yep.
So,
and my thing is that we've gotten over the language thing.
Yeah,
with both of the kids, especially the younger one.
In a lot of these books, there is very my kids will point it out.
Yeah.
There's colorful language. I've listened to all of these books in the car with my children. They recognize when there's
they've heard it. If they watch YouTube, they've probably heard it.
They've heard it.
They've heard it from mommy driving in the car because mommy's from New Jersey.
Yeah, but they glean the culture from it too. They're like, can hackers do that kind of stuff?
Yeah, they're like, Dad, can hackers do that type of stuff as opposed to, Daddy, that guy said fuck.
Right. My poor children, I've subjected them to all these books.
And you know what? They'll be better for it.
On the plus side, they've learned. Yeah, they've learned from it.
Yeah. Like, so that was a weird one. And we gave up on the language in that type of stuff in that not last year, the year before COVID, our oldest had to do book reports during the summer. And the recommended reading they had was, one of them was Trevor Noah, Born a Crime. But it was that on the page. But when you clicked on it to go to Amazon to buy it, it was a Jim Thorpe book. So we read Trevor Noah, Born a Crime. And you want to talk about language in that book? Everyone in the family listened to that, including at the time the 6-year-old.
It happens.
And that is my 4th time listening to that book, and it does not get old. It is amazing.
I think it's really important to... I like listening to audiobooks in the car with the kids. Regardless of what it is, whether it's fiction, non-fiction, related to cybersecurity, or loosely related to cybersecurity. But, my children have really... They pick up on bits and pieces, and they're more enamored with certain works than others. But it's been really, it's been positive.
We did
you come out of that basically if my kids took something from this, they can talk about it with me, and it's a positive thing.
We did. So we did, and I'm trying to find the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, which was the prequel by Suzanne Collins to The Hunger Games. And the kids have seen many of the Hunger Games movies and that type of stuff, and especially the older one. And it was quite a long book, and we listened to that for quite a while. And it was, Daddy, we gotta go to the store. Can we take your truck so we can listen to the book?
Right.
With that one, and it was, which I find weird in that we've tried to get the oldest to read the Harry Potter books. Nope, doesn't want anything to do with them, but loves the movies and has seen every one. Loves them, but won't read the books.
What was the one about the cyborg?
Which one?
I want to end in that.
Which one?
I want to end in that.
Which one?
Next week I'll have we talked about it before. That was a really cool one.
Because I can think of a number of cyborg books. Her. Movies. Her.
No, not an AI. Well,
AI?
No, not an AI, but a cyborg. Okay. It was. I want to say it was a female author. Really, really good.
People in Discord are yelling at us right now.
But yeah, everyone listening is yelling at us. So.
No, they're
Next
not,
week,
actually.
I can't gain access to my Audible easily right now to tell you what it is, but
a female cyborg. What? No, female author with a cyborg.
A female author with a cyborg, and they do this like mission to a distant planet, and the humans bring along with them a cyborg, and the cyborg has these kind of like revelations, and it's a series of books. What is it called?
It's Asimov. No,
it's
it's not the 3 Laws of Robotics with Isaac Asimov and all that stuff.
No, it's people are yelling at us right now in the car because we can't think of what it is.
Murderbot? Is it Murderbot?
Murderbot. Yeah.
Adrian is yelling at us.
Yeah. What was that called? Adrian read it. It's one of his favorite books.
Murderbot. He's saying Murderbot.
Okay.
Murderbot.
That said,
Murderbot Diaries.
That said, go read Isaac Asimov's Foundation series. That's one I got to go back and read.
Oh yes.
Yeah. Oh my God, that was so foundational for me when I was in middle school.
Martha Wells. All Systems Red. Thank you, Adrian. All Systems Red was the first one, and there's a whole series. But All Systems Red was the first one. If you want the fiction side of not really cybersecurity, but the whole cyborg kind of thing, super interesting, great story. And definitely one.
And Tyler,
I would say listen with your kids.
Tyler's saying Damon, Freedom TM, and the other one.
Damon is.
I'd argue anything by Daniel Suarez. Any of the ones.
Yeah, Daniel Suarez
it's interesting. We were joking lately on a closing note because I know we're running long, but we're jokingly like, oh, when any one of us dies, like there's a whole AI engine in server farm that comes awake that does things after we die.
It is like a dream.
Like your kids and friends look at you like, oh my God, like that's amazing. I'm like, no, it's a book by Daniel Suarez called Damon. Like where that actually happens, that we're modeling that afterwards. Like that's
go read.
Like that could be like not just.
That's
fiction,
how I'm setting my wheel up.
Right. That's
Smart
like how we're setting up. There's a whole. That's in Marvel too, like a whole like AI engine that spins up after you die that like does things based on the news reports that you've done. Like that's.
I'd also
Daniel Suarez did a great job with Damon, Freedom TM,
everything he's done.
Everything he's done.
Everything he's done. What is the other one about? What is it called? Delta V. Delta V was awesome.
Dude, Delta V was awesome. That was
a Suarez?
Yeah, Suarez.
Yeah,
I haven't read that one.
Go do that one. It's a space odyssey, as it were.
Yeah.
Delta
highly
V was
accurate
awesome
too. I did some fact checking on some of his stuff. And
Daniel does a great job of. Damon was his first book, and we were blessed to have him on the show when he released his first book, right? And then he blew up after that because he puts his heart and soul into every single one of his books. Yeah.
And if you also want a good time on the space side, there's one new one out that I haven't read, but anything by Andy Weir is amazing. Go. Let's put it this way: I was working, I think, with Tyler at the time, and I was listening to one of the Andy Weir books, the first one about the mission to Mars that got turned into a movie with Matt Damon.
The Martian.
The Martian. Yeah, The Martian. I was listening to The Martian, and I had to go to a client site, and it was a 3.5-hour drive. And we weren't sure if I was actually supposed to be on site or not, and that we couldn't get a hold of the contact. And they said, why don't you drive out there just in case? And my answer was, okay. Because I was listening to The Martian, and it was 3.5 hours out and 3.5 hours back. So I had 7 hours that I got to listen to The Martian, and it was totally worth it. And turns out I didn't need to be on site at all, and in fact they weren't actually scheduled to have us out there. But we met our commitments that we needed to. So yeah, it was awesome.
Outstanding.
He autographed a copy of the book for a friend of mine, and what he wrote was, "We're all fucked."
Yep.
Well, thank you for listening and watching this edition of Paul Security Weekly. Larry, take us out.
Over and go listen or read something.